Hello, everyone. My name is Danielle Ruger-Morowski, and I am the Associate Director of Partnerships at Parker Dewey. I'm really excited to talk to you all today about our platform and micro-internships and how it can help you overcome some of those barriers that you might be clarifying for yourselves in the poll. A little bit of housekeeping as we get started. I am going to keep an eye on the chat throughout the webinar. I just put a message in there so you can see where that popped up. If you have a question, please don't hesitate to put it in there. Hello, Monica. Good to see people using it. Usually I'm pretty good about being able to keep up with it live, but if for some reason I do get behind, I promise I will catch up at the end. So, to get things started, we have the poll, we have these challenges on the screen because we know it's not uncommon for all of you to experience some barriers as you're trying to launch your careers. So what you see in that poll and on the screen ended up there because these are the things that we are hearing consistently from early career talent that they're having a hard time with. Whether you're not sure what you want to do and jumping into a traditional internship feels like too much of a commitment, or maybe you're just struggling to get your foot in the door. Maybe you don't have transportation, or maybe you're finding opportunities, but they're unpaid and that's not realistic. A really common one is a lot of folks just don't have a lot of time. Maybe you have family care obligations or a job you can't afford to take hours away from unless whatever else you're doing is also paid. Maybe you're a student athlete and you've got a really busy practice and game schedule. All of those are reasons why the traditional internship may not be an accessible first step for you. Hello to everyone in the chat. It is great to have you here. And if you are resonating with these challenges, again, let me know in the poll. But if there's some other challenges that you're struggling with, please do not hesitate to put those in the chat as well. The good news is that micro-internships can help you overcome these barriers. So next, I want to take some time explaining exactly what Parker Dewey micro-internships are. So to put it succinctly, they're short-term, paid professional projects. By short-term, we really mean short-term. Most of these projects take somewhere between 10 and 40 hours in total. And that's because when we say project, we mean you're finishing a specific deliverable. There's something you're completing as opposed to ongoing responsibilities or tasks. And that's what makes it so short-term. Now, combine that short-term nature with the fact that most of our experiences are remote, and that's what really tends to be the difference for a lot of you. If it's remote, they're mostly asynchronous, meaning very few check-ins along the way, but most of the work is done whenever you have the time, as long as you're hitting the deadlines, and that makes it really accessible. Another thing to note about Parker Dewey micro-internships is that they are always paid. So I see about 2/3 of you in the room today said, I can't afford an unpaid internship. And you're not alone. A lot of people can't afford to spend time on something unless it's compensated. These are real projects demonstrating real skills, so there's real pay associated. And you get to see the amount each project pays before you even take the time to apply. Now, what you see in terms of projects is typically going to be reflective of the types of employers your school is engaging or that tends to be interested in your institution. Companies do have the ability to feature projects by specific schools, but there are also going to be some opportunities that are open to everyone. So regardless of your institution, you will be able to see those. We also have some exciting opportunities right now where if you've already made a connection with an employer that's interested in engaging you in the project, we may be able to cover the cost for the employer, making it really easy for them to say yes. And I'll get to those details later. Now, what you will not find on our platform are going to be things like paint my fence or walk my dog. There's nothing wrong with those things, just not really in line with what we're trying to do at Parker Dewey, which is help you demonstrate the skills you're building in your higher education degree programs. But in those open to all projects or in projects you might see specific to your schools, we see things from all different types of departments and industries. So excited to show you what that looks like. So hopefully, while I was explaining what micro-internships are, the benefits were clear, but want to make sure it is crystal. So first of all, that accessibility. You don't need a car for most of these. You don't need to be in a specific geographic place. You can do them from anywhere you have a Wi-Fi connection and with a pretty flexible schedule. This is real experience that you get to add to your resume or LinkedIn, but a quick note about that part. Micro interns on Parker Dewey are actually independent contractors of Parker Dewey. So you will see projects with a variety of different companies when you look at the platform, but regardless of what company you work with, Parker Dewey is the employer. So when you add this to your resume and on LinkedIn, Parker Dewey goes where that employer slot is. We talked about that flexibility in terms of hours, although you do get the chance to connect for most projects with a professional at the company to kick things off. So you're still expanding your network. For those of you who aren't sure what you want to do, this is a great way to explore options without having to start at the big commitment. And the reason most of the employers using Parker Dewey use it is because it's focused on you all, early career talent. Their goal isn't just to get a project done. Their goal is to identify candidates that could be a good fit for something longer term. So while it's not guaranteed, there's the potential that there could be a traditional internship or a full-time job offer waiting at the other end of your project experience. And I know I already mentioned it, but highlighting again, because we know it's important, they are paid. So, I want to take a moment now to highlight who can do micro internships. If you don't qualify yet, or for some reason, want to make sure we're being respectful of your time. You do need to be at least 18 years old. Because micro interns are independent contractors at Parker Dewey, that is a hard and fast rule. If you're not 18 yet, hopefully we'll see you back here on your 18th birthday. You also do need to be either a current student or a recent graduate of a US-based higher education institution. Now, with that, I usually get follow-up questions. One, how far out is recent graduate? As long as you are trying to figure out the next step in your career, you're trying to get your foot in the door to do something different than whatever you're doing now, whether that's being a current student, or maybe you've graduated and you're looking, or maybe you graduated and landed a full-time job, but you realized it's not a good fit and you're trying to find the next thing, you're welcome to use Parker Dewey as long as you're trying to figure out a new phase of your career. Now, if you're employed full-time and you're just looking to do a side hustle, this is not the best place for you. There are other platforms for that. All right. International students, also a population I tend to get a lot of questions about. We have had international students do micro internships, but work authorization is required. And every school has kind of their own process for that. So if you are an international student, your first step should be to contact international student support at your institution. Ask about your school's process for CPT, pre-completion OPT, regular OPT, and just make sure you know if there are any rules before you start applying. There are rules, so just make sure you know what the rules are. And then undocumented students. Because micro interns are independent contractors, as long as you have a valid ITIN number, you can engage in these projects. So we've talked about what micro internships are. We've talked about the benefit. Let's talk about the how. We are actually going to get into the Parker Dewey platform, show you what it's like to create a profile, how to apply, and walk you through a little bit of what the process looks like after you do apply. Before doing that, though, just a quick reminder about Parker Dewey's role in all of this. We are the platform where you will find the opportunities. Parker Dewey Micro-Internships are exclusively available on the Parker Dewey platform. We're also the ones reviewing opportunities before they're posted to make sure that they are appropriate, that they're compensated appropriately. When you get paid from Parker Dewey, so we're the employer of record, and we're also a source of support throughout your micro-internship. Checking in to make sure everything's going okay, you've been able to connect with your supervisor, and here to offer support if you run into any hiccups. So with that context covered, first I want to say if you do not already have a Parker Dewey account, now's a great time to create one. There's no cost, obviously. Our goal is to be accessible. And if you don't have one, now is a good time again because you can follow along as we talk about best practices to set up a profile. If you already have a Parker Dewey profile, now is a great time to log in so you can follow along when we talk through these best practices. So I already have an account set up, but I'm going to go through first and talk about those pieces that are required when you first create your account. Those are going to be the bare minimum things you need to do to start seeing opportunities. Now, realistically, if you only do those things, your chances of selection is not great. So after we cover those basics, we're going to backtrack and then we're going to talk about those fields that aren't necessarily required, but are really important if you want to make a positive impression with employers viewing your applications, which I imagine most of you do. So starting with the basics, obviously gonna need a name, gonna need an email address so we can inform you if you've been selected. And then we ask for your current location and your hometown. Now, those of you who are really paying attention may be going, well, why do they need that? Didn't she say that most of these projects are remote? You are correct. Thank you for paying attention. Over 90% of these opportunities are indeed remote. The reason why we ask this is because of the longer term hiring goals that a lot of the companies using Parker Dewey have. So they may want to know, if I hire you for this micro internship, are you in an area where you could jump into a traditional internship or a full-time role? Or do you perhaps spend your winter breaks or summer breaks in an area where we have a location? Now, to that point, when we say hometown, we don't mean where you were born, especially if you were born somewhere and moved before you were even a year old and you don't remember that place. What we mean by hometown is where do you spend those academic breaks that you might have some time during to do a longer term experience with some of these companies. It's not relevant to every project. You can still get selected for micro internships, even if you have no geographical relevance whatsoever to the companies, but it's relevant for enough that that's why we require that question. You'll also be required to clarify your work authorization, so make sure that you are familiar with whichever category you would fall under and clarify that. And then the next required section is going to be that education section. So you're going to put in your institution. Again, it has to be a US based higher education institution. As you can see, when I start to put things in, the options are preloaded. We also have some partner boot camps that have met our criteria to be put in the system. If you are a student at a US based accredited institution and you're having trouble finding your school name, play around a little bit. Sometimes we see folks putting in abbreviations, and that's just not how it is in our system. But if you're still struggling, you can contact support to have it added. You'll put in the details of your major, the dates for the degree you're pursuing, the type of degree you're pursuing. Now, if you have attended multiple education institutions, depending on the details, you might want to add second education institution. What you should put in this education section is going to be an institution that you are currently attending, for sure. That should be your primary education. But let's say you got your associate's degree somewhere, you went on to get your bachelor's degree somewhere else, now you're getting your doctorate degree at a third place. Add all of those institutions. Now, if you only took a couple of classes somewhere one summer, you didn't graduate from there, you're not enrolled there anymore, that's not an education institution you should add. But if you have graduated from somewhere else and are currently attending a different school, make sure you add both. Companies can post projects for specific institutions through this platform, and sometimes they'll post a project and it's open to alumni. So if you are an alumni of a community college that a company is interested in connecting with, we want you to still be able to see those projects. All right, the next required section is going to be this demographic section. Now, I say required kind of loosely. You are required to answer the questions, but for every one of them, there's the option to prefer not to disclose. Now, before you select that option, which you are welcome to do regardless, but before you do, I want to make sure you're aware that the companies who are making hiring decisions, they don't see any of the information from this tab, not a lick of it. This is just for us at Parker Dewey because we have the goal of making this a platform that is accessible, that is equitable, that's going to give folks from different backgrounds access to opportunities to launch their careers. So these questions are really just for us at Parker Dewey so we can know, are we doing what we set out to do? All right. So with that, folks, we have covered the basics, that very, very base, what you need to do to be able to start looking at opportunities. But if you started to apply with just that in your profile, it's not a lot for employers to go off of. So that's why we're now going to talk about some of those things that are going to be beneficial to you when you're putting together your profile that aren't required. One is going to be a profile photo. Now, you may have received advice from your career center saying never to put a photo on a resume or something of that nature. And that's good advice. Your career center is your friend. You should listen to them. But on Parker Dewey, it's not really a resume. It's more in line with like a handshake or a LinkedIn profile, whereas a photo is appropriate. It adds a level of personalization. So just standard head and shoulders. Take your industry that you're trying to get into consideration when you're picking your photo. If your goal is to do really creative social media content, there's some more flexibility. If your goal is to get some accounting experience, that tends to be a more regimented field. You're probably going to want to go more traditional. The next is a personal statement. Now, if you've ever thought about applying to graduate school and heard the term personal statement in that context, I want to make it clear this is not the same thing. We are not looking for an essay. In fact, you are limited to 255 characters here, so needs to be short. If you are not sure what to put in that section, I'm going to bring up a resource here real quick that has some professional communication tips. So I'm going to put that resource here in the chat. Bear with me for one moment. And here are some resources for that personal statement. Now, you do not have to follow this formula I'm about to review, but it can just give you an idea of how to get started. Again, if you're having trouble thinking of what to put there. So what we've got in this example formula, first maybe think about one or two adjectives that both genuinely describe you, but are also relevant to what you want to be doing. So for example, if you are interested in marketing or social media projects, those types of opportunities often involve keeping track of dates and assets and schedules. So it usually requires someone who is organized. If you are genuinely an organized person or a date-oriented person or something like that, that could be a relevant adjective. I see a good number of you have also noticed that I put up a poll here. While we're going through the rest of the formula, would love for you to reflect on, out of those options, which one of those adjectives is typically not going to be helpful in getting picked for a micro-internship. The next section, I encourage you to reflect on what are a couple strengths, experiences, or skills that, again, are really relevant to what you want to be doing. So if you're interested in data analysis projects and you have a I always struggle with that, data analytics certificate from Google or wherever else you might have taken one, maybe that's something you want to highlight. If you have experience writing press releases and you want to do a PR micro internship, maybe that's something you emphasize. But just think, what is something that if I was an employer, I'd want to know right off the bat about me as a candidate? Whatever your answer is, that's probably a good thing to include in that personal statement. Now, another thing you can include, you don't necessarily have to, would be your goal on Parker Dewey. And these are going to be really varied depending on where you are in your educational journey. For some of you, you may be looking to explore career opportunities. Others may be looking specifically to get a foot in the door at a particular type of company. But here we see examples of that formula in action. This person highlighted that they're ambitious and tech savvy. They have great writing skills, so that's their skills or experiences they highlighted, and they're just looking to build real-world experience. For someone early in their career, that's a great personal statement. This person highlighted that they're analytical, organized, and proactive. They've got that certificate in data analytics. I said that much better that time. And they're looking to build awareness of what they can do with a career with those skills. This person said they're a hardworking graduate and they emphasize their research skills and experience with developing marketing strategies. And they've got a little bit more of a specific goal. They want to work really at a mission-driven organization. That's really important to them. So looking back at our poll, looks like most of you got it right. Though out of those, the adjectives that's probably not going to be too helpful is nice. And the reason is it's not going to tell an employer anything about you that's really going to help them make a decision about whether you'd be a good candidate, even if you weren't nice. And I'm sure most of you are. I'm getting very lovely vibes from the chat. But even if you weren't, you would fake it for the sake of professionalism, most likely. So nice isn't going to help them decide whether or not to pick you. Now, there may be some opportunities that provide someone who has great people skills, strong communication skills, maybe they're very personable. Those are examples of things you would put in your personal statement instead to make it relevant to those types of roles. All right, so now that we have talked about that personal statement, too many tabs up, bear with me. Next, you're going to go down here and we have this question. Are you willing to relocate for a full-time offer? Now, if you're a first-year student, probably not yet. You've got the rest of your degree to finish. But if you are graduating or have recently graduated and you're open to being in different parts of the country, then go ahead and make that clear. It might be relevant for employers who are using this to audition for something longer term. To that point, we'd love for you to highlight some zip codes that you might be interested in after you are done with your schooling. Now, if you have grown up in the same town, you're going to school in the same town you grew up in, and your plans after you graduate are to stay in the same town. There's nothing wrong with that. Feel free to put the zip codes for where you currently are. Just helps folks know a little bit about your intentions. All right, so next up on that optional, oh, I skipped a couple of things. Sorry about that, folks. Forgot. We also have affiliations down here. Now, some of you may have found out about Parker Dewey from an organization. We have partnerships with folks who support different demographics, first generation students, non-traditional students, things like that. If you have found out about us from such an organization, there's a chance that there's an affiliation for the organization. Check the page that you started to create your account from. If there is such a thing, it will tell you to add that. So what that might do is open up projects posted by employers specifically wanting to engage that population. There are also a few here that could be used by anyone for whom they're relevant. So if you are, for example, a veteran or a student athlete or part of your school's honors program, you can add those as well. Same thing, they might unlock projects specifically intended for those populations. If you are specifically an NCAA student athlete, we'd also love for you to indicate that. Now, this doesn't necessarily unlock additional projects, but it's a filter setting that the employers can use. Sometimes we see that employers like to consider student athletes first, in this case because they know you have busy schedules, so this might be the only way to reach you, but they also know you're coachable. You know how to work as part of a team. You're goal-oriented. And those are things that a lot of employers are looking for. So if this is true of you, make sure you hit that, not really a button, whatever you call it, hit yes. Next up, this highlighted experience section. Now, I may see some of you moving ahead looking at that resume section going, oh, wait a second, if I'm uploading a resume, why do I have to put experience in here? And I hear you, I understand the frustration, but hopefully some context is helpful in explaining why. When we look at this preview section down here, what you see is really similar to what the employers are going to see when they look at your profile. And the resume is going to show up as something they can click a link over here under documents. Anything you put in that highlighted experience section is going to be visible right away. They don't have to click into anything else. So I encourage you to think of this experience section as kind of a teaser. Pick 1, 2, usually 3. You could do as many as 5 if you really have that many directly relevant experiences. But pick just a few experiences that are most directly related to the types of projects you want to do. Now, some of you may be thinking now, well, lady, I'm here because I need experience. So what do I put in that experience section if I was hoping this would be my first experience? Fear not. Micro-internships are often the first professional experience for lots of folks. But in this section, you could put even class projects that are relevant to what you want to be doing in the future. So for example, we sometimes have companies who will post a micro-internship looking for a student to write a guest blog post. In those cases, if that's the type of thing you're interested in, even a detail of how you attacked your persuasive essay assignment in your first year English course could be relevant, especially if you upload that writing sample in the document section, which we'll get to in just a second. I see the question, does it make sense to put details of experiences if you already have that information in your resume? Yes, because this is, again, what the employer is going to see first without having to click into anything. That resume is going to be an extra click. So use this experience section and put in those details for those top few experiences that are most relevant as kind of a teaser to get them to say, you know what, I am interested in this candidate. Let me take that next step and look at their resume for even more details. Hopefully that's helpful. All right, so Next up, we do have that resume section. We have seen that employers have a strong preference for employers who have taken the time to upload a resume. So encourage you to do that here. Your Career Center, again, is your friend. If you haven't already had your resume reviewed, highly encourage you to do that. There's also some questions about availability. You can change this at any time. So when you are a first or second year student, you're probably focused on projects. Maybe you feel open to internships. As you progress in your educational journey, you're probably starting to think more about full-time jobs and careers. So just make sure you revisit this on a fairly regular basis to make sure it is updated. If you have some sort of website where folks can see your work, if you're a coder, maybe you have a GitLab. If you, or not GitLab, GitHub, you have a place where people can see your coding work. If you are a graphic design student, maybe you have a portfolio site. This is where you can put such a link. We also have a space for you to put in the link to your LinkedIn account. Now, as you can see, both of these are optional, but I would highly recommend putting in a LinkedIn account. If you don't already have a LinkedIn, it's free, it's a great resource. It's going to make it easier for you to connect with professionals, including your micro-internship supervisor if you get selected. So highly encourage you to create that profile and add that link here. Now, this next section, not all of you are going to use transparently. So for example, if you are a graphic design major or an arts major and you already put in a link to your portfolio site, you're probably not going to use this section. You already have something on your profile where employers can see examples of your work. But let's say you don't have a portfolio site yet. Maybe you have one or two examples, or a writing sample, or a specific project. This is designed to be a section you can use if you have work that you want to show that demonstrates your skills. So if you're, for example, interested in social media products or projects, maybe you manage social media for your sorority. You can create a PDF that says, here's the link to my sorority's Instagram that I manage. Here's the link to our TikTok. Here's the link to this. Here's the link to that. And then name it Sorority Social Media Management. That way, an employer is going to know what that is. They're going to be able to click on it, and they're going to be able to see real examples of your work, which can be really impactful. Now, a quick note though, whatever your file is named, that's what the employer will see down here under documents. So you can see this example I have, that's really long. Probably want to make that shorter to just graphic design example or design sample. Sometimes we'll see folks who will upload things they've done for class. If you upload something called Final Exam for Psych 231, the employer's not going to know what that is. They're not likely to click on it. So you might say psychology case study or something like that. Just try to make it clear to the employer what it is they might be looking at. All right, so to put that succinctly, folks, make sure you've got that professional photo. Add a personal statement with your goals. Make sure you add any educational institutions that you are either currently attending or have graduated from. Make sure that you add highlighted experience, even if it's just relevant class projects. Definitely upload a resume. Also highly recommend adding a LinkedIn link. And then do a quick proofread of your profile for things like consistency. Check. Make sure you don't do like what I've got in this example and have a missing period. Make sure there's consistency. I have my hometown in all caps, but I have my current location in a mix of uppercase and lowercase. Fix little things like that to make sure that you are putting together a polished impression. If there are any questions about the profile, this is a great time to ask them. I hope none of you are in the part of the country struggling with the wildfire smoke today, but I am, so I'm going to take a quick drink of my coffee and keep an eye on the chat in case there's anything coming in. All right, looks like we are good to move on. So going back to our slides here, just going to make sure I'm covering. Yeah, thank you. I see Jenna saying this is helpful. Monica said the info is good. Love the engagement and letting me know that y'all are there. We've talked about how to create an account. These are the basics we went over for setting up your profile. Once you've set up your profile, you can go back and forth between your profile and the dashboard. If you missed where I am, I'm up here at the top corner. You can go to profile, you can go to dashboard. Super easy to go back and forth. These are the tips for success we just reviewed for your profile. But if you are not so much a hear it, watch a video person, and you're more of a, I want to read this in a tutorial type of person, I just put our Career Launcher tutorial in the chat so you can check it out that way as well. I often also get asked, are we going to get these slides later? 100%. Slides and recording are going to come your way afterwards. All right, so now the fun part, we are going to talk about how to review opportunities. So I'm going to again close some of these tabs, guilty of always having too many open. So we went from our profile to the dashboard. I see the question, what if my school is not listed as an institution? As long as it's a US-based accredited higher education institution, it should be. If you want to send me privately the name of your institution, I can. If it's not a US-based higher education institution, unfortunately, that means you don't qualify to use the Parker Dewey platform. Often what we see is it may be that you're using an abbreviation that just isn't what's in the system. Like if you put in UCLA, all you're going to see is UCLA Extension, but University of California, the main campus, is in there. You just need to spell it out and match with whatever we have preloaded. All right, so looking at the available micro-internships. Now, what you see is going to differ depending on your educational institution. Some of you may see a section at the top called featured instead of all open. So I'm going to switch my education experience real quick here just to show what that looks like. So before we had open to all at the top. Now we have featured. Thank you for joining, Lydia. Have a great day. But in featured, anything you see in this section, if you do see it, that's visible to you, but not necessarily everyone on the platform. There's something about that project that makes it only visible to folks from certain schools is typically the factor. This could also be where projects just for student athletes or veterans or those types of projects might pop up as well. So anything in this section, give it a little bit of extra consideration. Underneath that, you're going to see these open to all micro-internships. Now, if you are logged in real time right now, you're going to notice there are only a few. Now, usually, you're going to see somewhere between 1 to 2 dozen projects per day. What you have also probably noticed is they tend to move quickly. So this one's going to be making a selection soon, as is this one. This one decided to put a little bit of advance notice because it's one of those rare on-site ones. But the point I'm trying to make is most of these projects are going to make selections pretty quickly, and new ones are going to take their place. So that's why we encourage you to check in regularly, because what you see today, probably different from what you're going to see next week, totally different from what you're going to see in a couple of weeks. If you hit the drop down, if you decide you're interested in a project based by the title, you can learn about the project, when they're hoping to have it start, when they'd like it to be completed, and the estimated number of hours. Now, this is estimated because you don't need to formally track your time as a micro-intern. You're paid based on completion of the project. But this gives you a ballpark so you can kind of determine, well, do I have this much time? Do I feel that this compensation is worth that much time? So you can make an informed decision about whether or not you want to apply. If there is an on-site component, which happens sometimes, we have an example of that here, you'll be able to see that before you even click into the opportunity. This, like most experiences, is entirely remote. I see the question, how long on average does a project stay visible? It really depends on the employer. So when they post, the employer on their side, the default is for the start date to be a week from whenever they're posting. Very often, that's what ends up happening. Now, some employers will say, I want to give it 2 weeks, or I actually don't need this to start until a little bit later. If they're looking for a very specific type of talent, often they'll push it out a little bit because they know it might take a little bit longer for that type of talent to be on the platform and see the opportunity. But long-winded way of saying it's determined by the company when they post. Now, another note about that, though, is that let's say I posted a project today and I have the start date set to be next week. We've had employers do that. And then within a couple of hours, they got a candidate where they said, I don't need to wait. I love this candidate. I'm picking this candidate. They don't have to wait until the target start date to pick somebody. So if you see a project that interests you, highly encourage you to apply as soon as possible. And that's why it's a great idea to make sure your profile is ready. So let's say I decided I'm interested in this project. I can hit apply, and then there's going to be some questions. The first one is almost always going to be, why do you think we should select you? So this is a really good one to practice answering, and we're going to talk about some resources related to this question today. If there are additional questions and what those questions are up to the employer. If you are an international student, yes, we get lots of questions for international students. You may be able to do micro internships, but it depends on your institution. So your first step, if you're an international student, is to ask your school about their process for CPT, pre-completion OPT, and standard OPT. Now, Parker Dewey is the employer of record, so if you get approval, regardless of what company you're working with, that offer letter you need is going to come from us. There are also some yes or no questions here. Now, the employer is ultimately the one who's going to be making decisions about who they hire for these projects. What they're going to see is a combination of your responses to these questions and the information in your profile. That automatically gets attached, so you don't have to put that stuff in every time you want to apply for something. You should still review it on a regular basis to make sure it's up to date and you're making a good impression, but it makes it easier since it's automatically attached. Now, these questions down here, the employer does not see. This is just for us at Parker Dewey. So our goal here is to see, were you thinking about this company before? Would you apply to anything with this company otherwise? What we often see is that because these are so short term, it doesn't feel as intimidating. This gives you a chance to try it out. It's 10 or 40 hours. If you like it, great. Now you've got a connection at a company that wasn't on your radar before. If you don't like it, well, you've learned something about what you don't like and you move on to the next. So this is just for us to know, where did you stand with this company before? So as promised, resources for how to best answer these questions. I'm going to put this link in the chat. This has some great advice right here for how to tackle these. One is to look for the question under the question. And I know this kind of sounds like something that a troll under a bridge might ask, like, answer my riddles 3. But what we mean by this is that why should we select you is going to be the first question, regardless of whether you're applying for a social media, a content creation project, a data analyst project, or a financial dashboard creation project. And those are all really different experiences. Your answer, depending on what type of project you're applying for, should be pretty different. So it's just encouraging you to think about, well, from this employer's perspective, what is my answer to this question? Because the answer very much depends on the opportunity. Make sure you read the description carefully. Often they're looking for folks with experience with a particular type of process or software or a certain skill. If you have that, highlight that in your response. One of the most important things, especially in my opinion, is to show instead of tell. And to that, we have a resource. I know I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but if you want to stay with me, I've jumped ahead to number 5. And this is showing the impact of something called the STAR method. So if you're not familiar, the STAR method stands for, and I'll put it in the chat, situation, task, action, and result. Now, while I'm in the chat, I see the question, do your employers see these answers first or your profile info first? Great question. Let me jump ahead for a second to answer it. What they see is kind of a combo. So the information from your profile is kind of around this. Underneath, if you've put highlighted experience, they'll see that under your application responses. So it's kind of all put together. All right, so going back to this STAR method in action. Here we see 2 responses to a question. They're applying for a social media project. And this person said, you should select me for this project because I've experienced making attention-grabbing social media posts. It's not a bad reason. It's a relevant response. But let's imagine I'm an employer talking to my colleague about who I should pick. Hey, employer colleague B, do you know anything about who I should pick for this micro internship? I'm not sure who I should select. Colleague B, oh, what about the one with some social media experience? Colleague A, it's a social media project. Pretty much all of them reference social media experience. Which one are you talking about? And C. Now let's look at this other response. This person had the same reason. You should pick me because I've done this kind of stuff before. But they used that STAR method. They gave a situation. I'm the social media chair for my sorority. A task. I was in charge of the social media campaign for our fundraiser. They described the action they took. I planned a series of videos. Now let's imagine they also put a PDF with links to those social accounts on their profile, even more impactful. And then they gave a result. One of the videos I put out there got record engagement. We saw more people at our event than we ever had before. This is not an essay. In fact, it is only one, two, three. Well, I got messed up with highlighting, but 3, 4 sentences. 2 to 4 sentences, folks, are typically going to be really effective. But in those 2 to 4 sentences, if you can tell a little story, that really makes the difference. So let's replay that scene. Hey, colleague B, I need to pick someone for the social media micro-internship project. Any thoughts on who I should pick? Oh, what about the one that did those really neat videos promoting her sorority's fundraising event? Colleague A, I know exactly who you're talking about. I clicked on those links. I thought they were so talented. Let's pick them. So maybe a little exaggerated, but y'all see the point and the impact of doing things like adding some of those details. Now again, I have too many tabs open, so I'm going to come back to this. So we talked about showing, don't telling. When we say mirror the brand tone, match the vibe, match the energy. If they're using very stereotypical professional language, again, try to do something similar. If they're using a little bit more informal language, feel free to be slightly more lax. Make sure, again, it's not long. That's where we're talking about keeping it short, but impactful. And when we say short, though, there is too short. Go beyond yes or no where you can. If someone says, do you have experience with Photoshop? If you just say yes, that's not nearly as compelling as saying, yes, I used Photoshop to use that STAR method to give a little story. So we have talked about how to submit or how to respond to those questions. Then you can submit your application. After that, you're going to see your status in the Applied tab. Anything under active, you're still being considered for. If it's moved to past, that means you weren't selected for that particular project, so you know where you stand. Now, an employer might message you about your application. If they do, it will be in this Messages tab. Sometimes they might have a follow-up question. If the project they are selecting for requires strong interpersonal skills, they might request a brief Zoom interview. But in a lot of cases, the micro-internship is an interview for something longer term. So most of the time, they're just going to make a selection based off your profile and application responses without any further interview. And that's why it's so important to make sure your profile and those responses are thoughtful, free from errors, because that's typically your only 2 opportunities to make an impression. But if they do message you, again, it'll show up in here, and there's also a friendly reminder. Now, we're keeping an eye on the companies. We review everything first, so hopefully a non-issue. But if a bad actor ever gets through, this is your reminder that when it comes to Parker Dewey micro-internships, your pay comes from Parker Dewey. And that means the only folks that need the information necessary to pay you is Parker Dewey. So if anybody else in this messages ever says, hey, I want to pick you, I just need your social security number, or I just need your address, or I just need any personal information, say, no, you don't. Only Parker Dewey needs that, and let us know immediately, and we will make sure that is addressed. Again, usually a non-issue, but we want to make sure you are extra protected and informed. So the other tabs here, once you get selected, you'll see it move over to this section. That's also when you'll be informed via email. We'll talk about those next steps here in a second. And then the completed is where it'll move once the employer has marked it as complete. I see a question, what if they ask for my school email? If they ask for your school email in the messages, it depends. If it's part of a program, meaning that these projects are only to be for folks from this school, like if that's what it says in the question, if it's not a message, but it's a question, then that's in there. We've reviewed the question because there's funding that is only available for students from your school. So they might be asking from your school email to verify. So that's again, if you're applying, just to give visual clarity, I'm just going to click on something random. And there's a question that says, please provide your school email address so we can verify, you're at this school. We review the things before it becomes live. So we have given the okay. There's some reason that question is relevant. If you get a message here that says, hey, I want your school email address, maybe there's a good reason they're asking for it, but that is a red flag. So what I would do is reach out to us at support and say, hey, this person's asking for my school email address. Why would they need that? And we want to make sure that all your communication until you're selected takes place on the platform, again, for an extra level of safety. So fantastic question. I would encourage reaching out to support with a follow-up on that one. We've talked about the different sections of the platform as promised. What happens after you get selected? You'll get an email notifying you. This is where I'm going to put a quick plea to make sure the email you have associated with your account is one that you check regularly. It doesn't have to be your school email, but please just make sure that you are looking at that email on a regular basis, especially if you are actively applying. Few things are more heartbreaking than a student getting selected and then missing the opportunity because they didn't check their email in time to get started on the project. It is an expectation, since these move quickly, that if you get selected, you're going to respond within 24 hours. Now, that's stated. We know you all have lives. For many of you, this is appealing because you're busy. So I'm not saying that you do the project in 24 hours. That response could be, thank you so much. I'm really excited. I'm going to respond in further detail tomorrow. Tonight I have a game, or tonight I have to watch my little sister, or you don't even need to have any tonight. I'm doing this. You can just say, I'm going to respond in more detail tomorrow. I'm really excited. But just make sure they know, okay, you've got the email. You know you're selected. We're getting things rolling. You'll also see when you get selected, we have templated language for you. So it's super easy for you to send that first message and get the ball rolling. What you do, really follow the checklist that we send to you. But if you have any questions, you are going to be encouraged to connect with the professional at the company. They're a resource if you have questions. If you're having trouble connecting with that professional, or you feel like you're having trouble communicating with them, like things aren't getting through, we're a resource for you. Let us know if you're having any sort of issues. When you have that kickoff call with the professional, something else I recommend asking is, am I working with anything confidential? Now, when you agree to Parker Dewey's terms of service, and you get reminded about this when you get selected, one of the things you're agreeing to is a non-disclosure agreement. That's basically just saying, if the company you're working with tells you anything confidential, you're not going to go blast it out to the whole world. Now, most of the time, the things micro-interns are working on aren't confidential at all, but you still want to ask. And if they say, no, not confidential, not at all, then you can also ask, well, is it okay if I talk to my mentor, my faculty member, my instructor about this project? And if they say yes, use those resources. Tell, maybe you have an alumni mentor, I'm working on this and this is how I'm thinking of going about it. Do you have any suggestions or thoughts? Use your resources to make the best impression possible. I see in the chat somebody has put HIPAA. Typically, you're not going to be working directly with any sensitive or HIPAA sensitive information. Even if you're interested in doing a project related to like medical coding or something like that, you won't have access to the sensitive information. Typically, the company will put like an identifying number where you don't know who that number is. You'll never know who that number is, but it still allows you to dig into the data without violating HIPAA or things like that. And a reminder, when you get paid, the pay comes from Parker Dewey. We're the employer of record, so don't ask the company you're working with about pay timeline or anything like that. They're not going to know the answer. We'll know the answer. So send those questions our way. Pay is processed at the end of every month. When you get selected, you'll get the forms via our secure payroll system. It's called Tapalti. So just make sure when you get picked, you fill those out. Once your supervisor marks it complete, that allows us to release the payment. So let's say your supervisor marked a project complete today. It's July 16th for those who are watching later. That means your pay will get processed at the end of July. Depending on how fast your bank is, you'll probably see it in the first couple days of August. Now, alternatively, let's say your project gets marked complete on August 2nd. That means it won't get processed until the end of August. You'll probably see it in the first couple days of September in your bank account. So if there is a delay, don't assume that we've forgotten you. It is coming. You're welcome to reach out and ask a question, but do encourage you first to reflect, when did I finish this project? If it wasn't more than a month ago, it just may be that it's a little longer, depending on when you completed it. So again, as promised, this is the checklist that you will get once you are selected. You get the guide for setting up that kickoff call, the forms to get paid, a reminder of those policies. Don't go blabbing anything confidential. Make sure if something comes up that you talk to us instead of ghosting the employer. Don't just throw this whole thing into ChatGPT, that kind of stuff. Some projects are really straightforward. After that kickoff call, it may just be a few emails back and forth. If it's a little bit more complex, maybe you will have some check-in calls along the way. Either way, you have templates, both of an email and an agenda, to help you reflect on what you've done so far, any questions you may have, and to help you make sure that you and the employer have expectations that are on the same page for the rest of the project. So use those resources to make a great impression. I see the question, is there a possibility of accelerating pay? So I imagine what you mean by that is either if I get into this project and it feels bigger than I thought it was, could I get paid more for the project? Or could the project become bigger than it was? And if we're both in agreement, and will the pay correspond with that? So let's talk about both scenarios. If you get into a micro internship and you are going over it with the supervisor and you're like, oh, this is more work than I thought it was going to be. That's one of those things where you contact Parker Dewey, let us know how it's differing from what the project description looked like, and we can help you navigate the situation. So we can either, if we deem that it is inappropriate or something was misleading, we'll work with the employer to say, hey, here's the limitations for what's reasonable in this amount of time, and here's what you actually put in the posting and why it needs to be this way. Or we'll say, hey, if you say you have enough time, this is bigger for XYZ reasons, you'd need to expand the pay accordingly. Now, typically, we're not going to let employers post anything that's going to take a crazy amount of time as a micro internship. So, for example, we've had folks who have wanted to work with a micro intern to build an app. That's a big project. There are lots of ways that could become more time consuming along the way, depending on if there are roadblocks. So something like that will help them break it into sections. The first project is researching what platform should we use to build this app. The second project related is going to be building a wireframe. When we break it into chunks like that, we're better able to estimate roughly how many hours those chunks are going to take. So if there's a roadblock that requires an additional chunk, that means there's an additional project and you're compensated for that project accordingly. I hope that is helpful, but not quite. Is there a situation where pay can be, oh, okay, you were asking about the pay timeline sooner than a month. Typically note that it is a once a month system. If there is something dire, like you shouldn't depend on micro internships to pay rent. They're a little unreliable, but let's say you got selected and you're like, I need this to make rent. This is just the situation. You can reach out to the Parker Dewey team. On a rare occasion, exceptions can be made. It's just not typically the norm. Hopefully the other information was helpful for somebody else. And then once you've completed the micro internship, very similar to the success checklist you get when you started, you'll get a success checklist to help you make the most of the experience once it's done. So you'll be encouraged to take our post survey. The employer has the opportunity to leave feedback in the platform. You'll be able to see that under the completed tab. We encourage you to reflect on the experience, and we give you a guide for how to add it to your resume and to LinkedIn. Again, regardless of the company you worked with, Parker Dewey is the employer of record. Now, if you ask the company and they say, yeah, it's fine to use our name on your resume, you still don't put it here. Where you'll put it is in the description. Now, if they're a large company with great name recognition, and they gave you permission, by all means, put it here. But if it's a local florist, Ma and Pa's Flowers, most people aren't going to know who Ma and Pa's Flowers are. So in those cases, it's probably to your benefit to describe the company instead of name them, regardless of whether they gave you permission. We'll see many folks who will do multiple micro internships. So we also have an example here if that happens to be the case for you. And kind of bringing it full circle back to those folks that we saw at the beginning who were struggling with getting a foot in the door or not being able to afford unpaid experiences. I won't read you everyone's individual quotes here, but what I will say is we have students from large schools, small schools, state schools, private schools, liberal arts schools, research schools, rural schools, urban schools, large schools, small schools. I think I'm starting to repeat myself. We have folks from a bunch of different types of schools who have had success with Parker Dewey Micro-Internships. So if you're inspired by seeing how different students have used this platform to get a foot in the door, to build experience, to, in many cases, even lead to something longer term, then this is a great place to look for those stories and those inspirations. So if you haven't already, and if you didn't during today's call, your next recommended step is going to be to set up that profile. Make sure it is complete, so when something comes along that you are interested in, you are ready to apply. Again, you do not want to wait. Also encourage you to log in regularly because these tend to turn over pretty consistently. So if you only log in once a month, there are probably going to be projects that were posted and made selections in between your logins that you never even saw. So check in on a regular basis. And if you are interested in a particular company that you haven't seen post micro internships yet, you may want to check out our Creating Your Own Opportunities webinar. We do this on a quarterly basis. Our next session isn't until September, but the recording and slides from the last session are always available. Now, one other note that's not always available is we do have some funding right now. If you have already connected with a company and you've maybe got a project idea, or there's potential for you to come up with a project that could reasonably be completed within 15 hours, you could perhaps have that submitted here. You'll put in the details of the company and the project you want to do with them. And if accepted, we can cover the cost for the employer. Now, typically, it's the employer paying for the micro internships. So what this does is it allows you to say to that company, hey, I want to do a project for you. I'm excited to show you the skills I have. And also, if I submit this and Parker Dewey says yes, I can get paid all at no cost to you, company who I want to work with. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm an employer, that's a pretty sweet deal. So it just gives you the opportunity to take ownership of your own career journey. If you've already got a connection with a company, maybe someone you met at a career fair, maybe someone who came and talked to your course, maybe it's a mentor that has a project need related to what you want to do, and their company has hiring goals for the future. There's the potential that you could get us to pay for it instead of the company having to do it. So encourage you to check that out as well. And if you haven't already, we've got a LinkedIn page. We have lots of different, resources, reminders about events, just all sorts of fun things here. So encourage you, when you create that LinkedIn account, to give that a follow as well. And thank you, Jenna. We also think that the opportunity to fund micro internships for y'all is super cool. So we hope some of you will take advantage of that. And with that, folks, I know that we only have a couple minutes left. I'll be here for a couple minutes for any questions, but I hope that this was helpful. I so appreciate you spending some time with me today, and hopefully I'll be writing some success stories about some of you in the very near future.